Okay, hi. Today we're going to talk about the world of finances. I, as you can tell from my channel, am a booktuber and read a lot of books. I also watch a lot of YouTube, and part of YouTube that I have been watching for years and years is finances, financial advice, financial gurus, all of that. And I know that a lot of these YouTubers that I follow have books. And so I decided to give their books a try to see if it was worth it to read their books as opposed to just consume like their shorter social media content. And it became much more about, as I was reading, about comparing and contrasting these books. And so I thought it would be a fun video and I would want to share kind of some of my takeaways with you. When I started my financial journey in my early 20s, really not knowing where to start, given the fact that I couldn't really go to my family for these things because they are state employees and get pensions, which is not something that I have in my job field, I had to kind of look beyond advice from the family and look more towards other resources. And the first thing that I came across, which I think is a lot of people's experience, is Dave Ramsey and his 7 baby steps, and started watching the Ramsey Show online and read his book over 5 years ago. I then got into the Money Guys, who are best known for the financial order of operations. I started watching Ramit Sethi earlier this year, and I also watched Berger. All of these individuals have their own books. So I'm going to go through a brief synopsis of each of them, what they're attempting to address in their books, and then talk about the similarities, maybe some of the differences between them. And then I want to have a section on which book might be right for you based off of where you are in your financial journey, or kind of your personality and how much energy you want to be giving to your finances. And I think this should go without saying, but I'm clearly not a financial advisor and I am reviewing books, so don't consider this financial advice. So let's start with The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. So I read this over 5 years ago, and I don't have notes on it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it is a fairly quick book that goes through Dave Ramsey's 7 baby steps, which I will be putting on the screen. Dave Ramsey's steps are first to save an emergency fund, which he defined specifically at $1,000, then to pay off all of your debts, excluding your mortgage, followed by a 3 to 6 month emergency fund, which is 3 to 6 months of typical expenses, then going into step 4, which is investing 15% of your income, step 5, saving for your children's college fund, step 6, paying off that home, and then step 7, build wealth and give. So Dave Ramsey's perspective on this is pretty prescriptive, and I think that what he is most known for is step 2, is the debt paying method. He doesn't believe in credit cards. He doesn't think people should have credit cards. He believes in 15-year mortgages as opposed to 30-year. And he highly advocates the snowball method of debt payment as opposed to the avalanche method. So I think a lot of people come to Dave Ramsey specifically for the advice around debts and the culture around debt and paying it off in that gazelle-like intensity. So I think that this is a fairly prescriptive book. It doesn't say a lot more from what I remember than what you can see him talk about at the baby steps online. Okay, the first book that I'm going to talk about is I Will Teach You to Be Rich. No guilt, no excuses, no BS, just a 6-week program that works. So this book, like it says, is a 6-week program. It is meant to be something that you take action on each week. I think that could be really positive for people who feel really stuck in their finances, who don't know if they're making the right decisions. This gives you a really prescriptive guide about how to set up your finances. So that can mean where to open your bank accounts. Are you at banking with the correct place? Like opening up high yield savings accounts, how many credit cards you should have, what you should look for with a good credit card, what you should look for with a bad credit card, how to budget properly. And he gives resources on how to build budgets and then how much you should be allocating to different things. So your savings, your spending on required needs, your necessities, and then your joy spending. So I think that this is where this book and Ramit's perspective on finances differs a little bit from others. He thinks that you should constantly be living your rich life, which means you are putting away money to spend. You are putting money away to spend guilt-free. You are able to buy and purchase and do the things that you want to do as long as it's within that prescribed budget of money that you have saved for those purposes. He also differs in that he has, of these books that I read, the lowest savings rate prescribed, which was 10%. This is 5% lower than Dave Ramsey, and it will be much lower than some of the others that we are going to talk about. So for my personal opinion, I struggle with the 10% notion. It feels very low. As your income grows, I don't really think that you need to consistently be spending 90% of your take-home pay. And I do question how long you would actually have to work to make a 10% savings rate work for you. So the average or the prescribed retirement year or retirement age in the United States is 65. I personally don't want to work till 65, and so I think that if you are someone who really values getting ahead, especially when you're young, which is the most important saving time in your life, then I don't know if I would. I think that then reading this and hearing 10% might make you feel like you're doing more than you actually are, and may not make you feel like you have to do what you maybe could do, especially as people's incomes accelerate. Living off of 90% of $45,000 is much different than living off of 90% of $150,000. So I think that your savings can grow as long as you don't grow too much into your means. So I think that there's a balance to be set that he kind of lands a little bit more on the side to me of less cautious and like more and maybe living a richer life always to sacrifice an even richer life later. Overall, too, I would say this book is written for like the average American. So someone that works in corporate world that gets a 401k. He doesn't really talk about 403bs or 457s, though those can, if you have those, I think that you can use some of the same information in this book. I would just keep that in mind. I think, too, that if you already have an understanding of finances, this isn't going to teach you a lot, but it really, to me, is the best one of the lot for, like, setting up your bank accounts, questioning the institutions you're using, and the like. I think that if you're more concerned about the investment aspects of your finances and your retirement investments, I don't think that this is the best book on the list for that. So now we're going to move to Millionaire Mission, which is by Brian Preston from The Money Guys. I've been watching The Money Guys for years. I got into them pretty quickly after I watched Dave Ramsey. I think that I realized that Dave Ramsey, just his values and views did not align with mine. I am not a debt person. I don't see the problem with having credit cards when you're responsible with them and pay them off every month. And so I was trying to find other financial gurus that thought differently than Dave Ramsey. And that's where I started watching The Money Guys. They have, as opposed to the 7 baby steps, the financial order of operations. In some ways, it's very similar to the baby steps They actually made a whole video comparing the FU to the baby steps, and I'll link that down below. So their first one is not having a $1,000 emergency fund, but instead having your highest deductible covered. So if your highest deductible is $2,000, then having $2,000 saved. The next one that they have, number 2, is your employer match. This means that you are getting whatever retirement matching that your company does. So some companies do full match up to a certain percent. Some companies do half match up to a certain extent. Getting to that level where you are able to get all of that free money from your company. The next one is high interest debt. So they talk through in the book specifically what they define as high interest debt and how their definition of high interest debt can actually change depending on your age and how valuable your dollars are in the market being invested over the period of time before your retirement. That might sound more confusing than it actually is. In the book, he goes through more detail. Number 4 is emergency reserves. They typically talk about 3 to 6 months of essentials, like being able to pay for your essentials. They talk about the nuance of this and how it can be more or less depending on your circumstance, depending on the volatility of your job or any other circumstances in your life, including if you're getting closer to retirement, you're going to want to have a lot more liquid. I think that there's a part of this that they don't really talk about, which is, I'm saying they because I'm so used to watching their channel that I think of Bo as well, but the book itself is just written by Brian. I think it's a little bit more prescriptive in that, some people might not be comfortable with that. Some people might want more emergency savings, and they really want to cap you out. And I think that it's because they're so invested in the concept of financial order of operations that they want you to get comfortable being uncomfortable because they know that their system works. And I think that there's a psychological element to that, sometimes people just need to do things to feel better, to sleep better at night. And they don't regret the fact that it costs them however much money in the long term of their retirement savings. I think that that's something to consider as you're reading this book or watching their channel. Number 5 is Roth IRA and HSA. I'm not going to go into too much detail about these, but there is Roth cap limits and HSAs are only available if you have a high deductible plan. I do want to talk about this because a lot of financial gurus talk about HSAs and the value in how much potential HSAs have, which is completely true. But I think that to me, there's a lot of risk with being in an HSA because that means you're in a high deductible medical plan. And I don't think that this is a surprise to people that the medical insurance in the United States is not that great. It can be very expensive. You could have emergency situations that happen, in which case an HSA is just not the right answer for you. I have seen this advice so much that I looked into it personally, and I started doing the math out of if I got onto my company's high deductible plan versus the current plan that I have. And my current plan is so good that if I had had any of the surgeries or procedures that myself and my partner have had over the past few years, my out-of-pocket, no matter what, is $200 for a surgery. My high deductible plan would be thousands of dollars. I just can't get on board with the risk ratio there. So I think that that's also something that does not come up with HSAs. I think that they're just assuming everyone's young, in their 20s, they're healthy, and that no emergencies happen. But medical debt is real in the US. Medical emergencies happen, and to each their own. I mean, if you only have a high deductible plan, absolutely see if you have an HSA. I just question it specifically for myself. I did the math. It didn't make sense to me, even though HSAs seem like they're great tax havens. Next one is max out your retirement. This is your retirement through your work. Number 7 is hyperaccumulation. They consider you should be saving 20 to 25%. And when you are a high income earner, which I don't remember what they defined as, something over $150,000, I believe, then they think that you should not consider your employee match program as a part of that 25%. So they're saying, you're making enough money that you can save that amount of money, save that 25% on your own, and then everything that your employer does is just more sprinkles on top of that sundae. This to me seems like really high. I think that if you watch their channel though, you know that they talk about being financial mutants. They're like, we want you to be much more frugal now so that you're saving so that you're going to be financially free much earlier. Number 8 is prepaid future expenses. So for the similar one for Dave Ramsey is paying for your children's education, but there can be a lot of different things that can come up for that. So they made theirs more broad. And then number 9 for them is low interest debt, which seemingly they define, depending on your age and the percentage, as your student loan debt and your mortgage. Though I still don't understand after reading this book what a low interest mortgage is, because some people have 2.5%, 3.5%, which is very low. I can definitely understand that. In the current market, some people might have like 6.5%, 7.5%, 8+%. That's starting to feel less low interest to me. And that's something that I wish they defined in the book. I think this book can be kind of repetitive if you read it in all one go. He wrote it in such a way where you could just kind of pick where you are in the FU and just read those chapters. And so some of the stories get repeated, some of the thought processes get repeated. So it's not that annoying, and it's a pretty quick book to read. So just something to keep in mind. Something else that comes up in this book that I kind of find a little bit of I see as a little bit confusing is talking about having more than that 3 to 6 month emergency savings, and how sometimes that can be beneficial because you could, when there's a market downturn or there's opportunities out there, you could use that liquid to do things other people cannot do. So he had some examples about things Warren Buffett has done and has made a ton of money off of. And I think I was in the hyperaccumulation chapter. Just to be clear, I listened to this on audio. I couldn't get it from my library at all physically. And so I wasn't able to go back because I could only get it through Spotify, which only gives you a certain number of hours. So I think that this part was in the hyperaccumulation step, but I don't know, part of me kind of thinks that you could have more money sitting in your savings accounts as long as you're making sure you're putting them into high interest, or you're having them in money markets, things like that make a decent amount of money, but can become liquid fairly easily. I think that a point that gets made in this book, maybe not directly, is that, and this is something Dave Ramsey says too, is that the average millionaire did not have an inheritance and did not go to a private school. And I think that some of that is to say that they didn't grow up rich, but I think another part of it that maybe is a little bit implied is that going to a state school is cheaper. You start off with less debt if you do not have anyone paying for your education expenses, and then you're already starting making better decisions for yourself and putting yourself in a better place when you go out of school, you graduate, and go out into the real world. Okay, so the final book is Retire Before Mom and Dad by Rob Berger. Rob Berger is a YouTuber that I started watching in the past few years, specifically when I was setting up my first IRA. And I don't watch a ton of his videos, but if I see something that he posts that I'm interested in, then I'll click and watch. He doesn't have something like the 7 baby steps, the 6-week program, or the financial order of operations. He calls these rules of thumb, and he doesn't necessarily believe in rules of thumb, thinking that everyone has a different situation and that you should be building your own plan out based off of that situation. And while I agree with that notion wholeheartedly, I do think that that is where his book fails a little bit, because it's not prescriptive. It's not really telling you what to do. It's giving you information and letting you make decisions. And so I think that if you're new to finances, this is going to be challenging to follow. I personally found this book at times challenging to follow. And like I said, I got into finances about 8 years ago. I am not intense about it. I'm not deep into anything. I'm still surface level, right? But if I find this confusing, I think that if you're new, you're going to be completely lost in some parts. I would say that the closest thing he has is into the levels, is like the levels of wealth, which I didn't find wholly applicable to keep in mind throughout the book. So it much more translates to the know your number concept from the Money Guys channel, of like knowing your number that you need to get to in order to be financially independent. I want to say again, I do like his channel, but I am going to be much more critical of the book itself. I think that the order of information is a bit confusing. He goes out of order in comparison to the other books in terms of talking about stocks and bonds. I mean, he goes into a lot of detail of what they are, how they work, in a way that none of these other books did. Money markets, ETFs, index funds, like how to check online. One of the things I really liked is he talked about the website Morningstar, where you could actually look at different index funds, look at different stocks, and see their performance, see how much you have to pay for them. He has much more detail about the types of funds that you should be investing in, and really the ones that you should be staying away from. He talks about different types of index funds to use and different portfolios to make. So I think that this is not really for the beginner, though it does have beginner's information in it. So in this one, which I appreciate, he clearly states that your assumed rate of return matters a lot. If you plug your numbers into these calculators online, if you do 6%, if you do 7%, if you do 8%, you are going to get wildly different numbers when looking at this over like a 20 to 40 year horizon. So we know what the market has done. We don't know what the market is going to do. And so I think that that's an important distinction to make. However, I had a pet peeve throughout this book because he started by talking about a 9.3% rate of return, which to me seemed quite high because it didn't sound like that was taking inflation into account, which he then corrects at a later chapter and says, yes, he was not taking inflation into account. Let's reduce that by 3% and let's get to 6.3, which I was like, okay, sounds reasonable. From other people online, they assume, I think, 7 to 8%, so 6 is still kind of low. But then when he would do certain examples, he would go back to that 9.3% rate of return, which we know is unreasonable based off of what he's already said. It's not going to be worth as much in the future, so you do a reduced rate of return to account for inflation. So he kind of did that a lot, not just with rate of return, but with other numbers. Like, one of his differences is he recommends basically a Roth 401k all around, with the exception of if you're a high earner. But then when he would do an example, he would use a traditional 401k. And I'm like, I would just want you to be consistent with the information you're telling me and the examples that you bring to the table. So that was like an annoyance that I had in this book. Overall, besides the Roth 401k thing, I think that he had similar suggestions as with your order of retirement funds as the Money Guys. He differs, in which case he kind of says get to that 20% savings level instead of 25%, but then he does start to talk about 30% at a certain point. So he was like, if you forced me to give you a number, I would say 20, but with everything in this book, it's really up to you. One disagreement he has is that he does not believe in using really fee-only advisors and gives some sort of alternatives to that. One thing I liked is that he talked about the difference between how a car loan and a credit loan works. This is just credit card loan. This is just something like revolving door credit versus like this finite kind of credit that you're spending each month, how that works, and really how that gets people into binds. I thought that was important information. But I would say overall, I found this book a little bit more confusing and would not be my go-to. Okay, so I've talked a lot. Let's talk about the similarities between the books. So I think that's something I can say that I didn't really talk about in my reviews, is that all of them say invest in index funds. Do not play the game. Do not try to bind individual stock. Keep it simple. I think that another thing is like don't get smart with it at a certain point. I think there's some notions in the Making the Millionaire Mission by Preston, where he talks about people getting kind of smart with their money in their 40s, where they've been investing for a long time, and they're like, I can do more, I could make more, and then lose a lot of money. I think that if you start to think that you're getting smart with it, then reading something like Retire Before Mom and Dad would be something better to bring you back down to earth, because he goes through the explanations and really explains why index funds are the most invaluable and most important tool that you could be using, and how you're always going to do better for the most part if you invest in index funds, and that you can get creative with the types that you're looking at, because there's tons of types of index funds you could look into, but get creative in a way that's smart, as opposed to pulling everything out and putting it into finance, or putting it into something like a business you have no idea is going to survive or not. Another similarity that they do have is also talking about how you should enjoy your money. Like, you are trying to become financially independent, financially free for a reason. And you need to find joy in your money as you're saving. I think that Ramit comes from it much more of the perspective of living that way now, and specifically Dave Ramsey and Preston and Bo talk about being more frugal now for your future. And like, they mean it. Like, they mean like get frugal. And I think that there is a value in a trade-off between those two things. Another similarity between these books is they really, for the most part, though some of them go into it a little bit, only talk about 401ks, which is not the only thing that people can have out there. I'm not going to say they don't talk about it, but they mention 403bs, they mention 457s. None of them really mention 401as, which is something that I have to contend with my partner and had to dive into on my own, because these books don't really explain those things. All of them talk about IRAs, Roths. I don't know if Dave Ramsey actually talks about HSAs, but they all kind of talk about the same ways you should be investing your money for the future and really focusing on those retirement accounts before you go into a brokerage. And so I think that that's a big takeaway, is that they're all giving consistent advice. I will say that's not all the advice on finances on the internet. You're going to see financial gurus who tell you to get into real estate, tell you to do this and that, and they don't disagree with those things, but they want you to be more financially independent before you move into those sorts of positions. And I think that a lot of the people that are coming to these books are not financially independent. You're trying to figure out how to get there. All of them, of course, clearly state it is so much better to start this young. I wish people read these types of books before they need to. Something as simple as putting money into a custodial IRA when you are a teenager and you have a high school job could do wonders for you in your financial future. And I think that that's another kind of important part of these books. Like, it encourages people to get into finances young, but it also encourages people of any age to get into finances and be responsible with their finances. So that way, hopefully, they teach their children responsible lessons and start to dig deeper. What are things that my children can be doing younger so that they are financially independent faster than I am. Okay, so who should read each of these books? I think that if you don't want to understand finances, you don't want to get into the minutia, or you are in debt and you do not have a lot of surplus income, I think that Dave Ramsey makes sense for some people, and reading The Total Money Makeover or following the Ramsey Show would be beneficial. If you just don't know how to set up your finances and need a place to start with budgeting and with just the financial basics, I think I Will Teach You to Be Rich is the best place to start with that. But I just still think that the 10% saving is way too low. It works the best for me, so I don't think this is a surprise. I personally would mainly recommend Millionaire Mission and following the Money Guys channel. I just think that their steps there's more going on, there's more nuance, but they still are fairly prescriptive. And if I were going to recommend 2 books to read, it would be the combination of I Will Teach You to Be Rich and Millionaire Mission combined. I think that those 2 things together can help you get on your way to setting up your finances in a way that works for you. And then if you're a little bit more advanced, then from this list, I think that Retire Before Mom and Dad is the better book to read. Though I will still say that Millionaire Mission and The Foo, it's just good to know if you're kind of going out of the prescribed order of operations. Rob Berger will say that you shouldn't have to just prescribe and go into an order and forego everything else, which I agree. I don't follow The Foo to a T. I pay extra on my mortgage instead of putting more into my retirement every month. I put a lot into my retirement, but for me, there is something of value in having a mortgage paid off and not having debts. I really do not like having debt. So getting that paid off by the time I'm 40 is the right plan for me. And so I think that that building your own plan out idea from Retire Before Mom and Dad has its time and place. I think that this was a very long video. I hope you found it helpful. Like I said below, I'm gonna have links down below of these different methods of operations, anything that I might have missed that I think is of value. And then before I go, another thing that I remembered that is similar between all of these books and YouTubers, which makes complete sense, is they have tons of free resources outside of the scope of just these books. You can watch their YouTube channels. Most of the books had references to guides and Excel files and all of these things that they have as free resources available on the internet for you to use on your financial journey, which I also really appreciate with all of these. So I think that's where I'm gonna leave it. That is all I have for this video. If you have any other books that you think that I should read around finances, not just by YouTubers, but anything else, let me know in the comments. And until next time, happy reading.